All right, I'm gonna get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Tech Tuesday. My name is Vanessa Puig with ITS Communications, and today we are going to be talking about Microsoft Lists. Josh, I just want to make sure, can you hear me okay before I get started?
I sure can.
Awesome. I have Josh Gorel today with us. He's our O365 product manager. So if you see his name in the chat answering questions, he's the perfect person to be answering. So we've got Josh today to help a little bit with answering some questions and to mention anything about lists that I may neglect to mention. But essentially, we are expecting quite a few people today. So we do have everyone's microphones on mute. However, if you have a question at any point during the session, please feel free to just post it in the chat. Or if you'd rather come off the microphone to ask your question, you can raise your hand in Zoom and I'll try to get to you when we have a moment to pause. I'm also recording today's session, so if at any point you want to go back and review material we've covered or even share this with some of your colleagues who were unable to attend today's session, there's going to be a follow-up email when the session is over that's going to have a link to the recording as well as some guides from Microsoft so that you can get started with lists and try it out whenever you have a chance. So without further ado, let's get started. There we go. So what is Microsoft Lists? It's an app that's been sitting in your O365 account for a while. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but if you have not, what you see on the right-hand side is the logo that you're looking for when you're looking for lists. And it's essentially just an app that helps you keep track of things. You can build a list and just kind of manage your work or your life, whatever you need to keep track of. Lists can help you do that. Here are some examples of things that lists might be useful for, like tracking issues, getting feedback about things, managing and tracking assets within your department, keeping track of routines, processes, contacts, inventory, anything that you can think of, lists can definitely help with. And you may be wondering why you should use lists. There are plenty of task management tools out there, and why should lists be another thing that I learn? Honestly, there are a ton of great tools out there, and I'm not necessarily trying to convince you to use one over the other. Whatever works for you is fine. A lot of people even just work in Excel and things like that. But if you're looking for a solution, if you're having some issues like really kind of keeping yourself accountable, keeping track of things that you need to do or that your team needs to do, Lists is a really great option for lightweight task management, where you can just very easily get a handle on things that are being requested from you or things that you just have to track in general. It's also really easy to get started with lists. If you've never used it before, one of the first things that you see when you create a new list are a bunch of templates available for you to get started with. I mentioned in the previous slide things like issue tracking and things like that. There's also templates for event planning, and budgeting and tons of different ones that you can at least start with a template and then edit that template to suit your needs. So you don't necessarily have to start from scratch. It's also pretty simple and intuitive to use. We'll take a look at the demo of how you can easily whip up a list to meet whatever goals you have. And then it's really easy to create tasks and then assign them to yourself or to colleagues. Since List is part of the O365 environment, it does connect to our directory. So I can tag myself in a task or even tag, people that I work with so that we each get notifications, which is a great other feature of List. When things are due, we might be able to get a notification from List to our Outlook, just kind of reminding us and keeping us on task that something is coming up that we need to focus on. And then you can also incorporate formatting for some visual elements that help you understand like who things are assigned to, when tasks might be completed, and you don't really have to worry about those things anymore. Lots of stuff that we'll get into in the demo. There's lots of different data types that you can add. This is a screenshot, an older screenshot of a list that I actually use with the ITS communications team. And we use it to keep track of all the requests that we get and just make sure that we are addressing them all and keeping track of everything. But some types of data that you will see in our list are text fields. We've got a description column here that just helps us give context to some of the requests that we're getting. And if you notice in the last column there called notes, that's another text field where we basically just type in updates of, the latest thing that happened with any task so that any one of us, if we wanted, can go in there and kind of get, up to speed with what's going on our team. You can also create things like categories and statuses. So we've got categories in ours for what type of request it is, things like operational initiatives, communication requests, videos. We've got training, lots of different categories that we created to just kind of parse out what type of work it is that we're doing. And what's really nice about List is that it integrates with other Microsoft apps like Power BI, for example, where if I was curious about the type of work that we're doing over a quarter or a year even, I could export all this data into Power BI and visualize all those categories of how much we've been working in a particular thing throughout the year. And you've also see things like status. So I've got it filtered by what's in progress, but you can also keep track of what's complete, what's running behind, and give things priorities if you need to. Of course, you can add dates to things. So if you've got deadlines, definitely put them in your list and filter it that way. And then you can also add people. So in this case, I have a column called assign to, and I add, or we all add on the team, who a given task should be worked on. So, I've got myself, my manager, and my other colleague, Bridget. And this kind of helps us keep track of, who has maybe a greater workload, who should get something else. And I've also got some conditional formatting going on so we can just easily visually see some color coding of who is assigned to what. Other data types that are not included on this list, but could be if we really wanted to, you can attach files to any task. So, if you're working on a project and a particular task includes several documents, you can attach them all to that one particular task. And, anybody on your team that might be sharing this list with you can look it up and get those files if they need to. You've got things like ratings, choices, images, links to different things on websites, whatever you've got, your OneDrive account, numbers, locations. You can even start a list from an existing Microsoft list. So there's lots of different data types that you can add within lists. And this looks very similar to something like Excel, for example. And for a while, the ITS communications team, as just an example, was using Excel to track all of the tasks that we were using. And one of the big reasons we moved to a tool like List is that as you're continuing to get work and tasks and line items in Excel, it just kind of blew up and it was just getting harder and harder to manage and find things very easily. And List, because it's a web-based application and it's a little easier to find data and manage. It ended up being a really nice tool for us to use and something that you might be interested in exploring as well. So, like any application, there are pros and cons for everything. I mentioned some of the pros, which are it is part of your O365 account. So there's a ton of integration with your other Microsoft apps. You can also create lists in apps like SharePoint and Teams, which are great for collaboration if you're working on a project together or just have like departmental tasks that everybody can see and have transparency in a list within SharePoint. And because it is part of your O365 account, you don't need to request access to it from ITS. You already have it, and I'll show you how to get it. And there's no additional cost to use it as it's already part of your account. I mentioned before too that you can also export and analyze data not only within Power BI, but also Excel. And you can create things like rules and even do things like approvals for workflows. There's Power Automate, there's linking forms, there's managing alerts. There's a ton of things to make sure that things you put in the list are not forgotten about. There are some cons to using it. They may not be cons to you. It really depends on how you plan to use something like this. But one thing I noticed off the bat is that you can't nest tasks, meaning you can't have a main task and then have subtasks underneath it. to kind of accordion or sandwich them together and keep track of things that way. However, Microsoft does have other tools like that that's usually more suitable for something like project management. So Microsoft does have Microsoft Project and Planner as other apps that are more suitable for, I'd say, like heavyweight task management. And then you do have a lot of options to customize and do conditional formatting for your list, but some customizations you may find you can't do unless you go into the advanced mode, and that requires some knowledge of JSON coding. Um, I did get a really good hint from Josh earlier today, which is if you would like to explore JSON coding and doing some conditional formatting in that way, you can actually use Copilot and ask Copilot how it might write a code for a particular thing you're trying to accomplish in lists. So just something there to think about. Some users report a lack of flexibility that's currently available in other apps. There are a ton of task management apps. You may have heard of things like Jira or Monday.com. And those have been around for quite a while, and they might be a little bit more robust. Lists actually came out in mid 2020, so it's relatively new, and Microsoft has made changes to how it's working, and I suspect it will continue to make changes to make the app, more user friendly, more robust, what have you in the future. And so because of those changes, it can be slightly glitchy sometimes. Like sometimes I will find myself trying to assign myself a task and I cannot find my name in the directory. That's usually pretty easily resolved. I usually just refresh my application and then it will happen. But there is a little button on the top right of your list application where you can submit feedback directly to Microsoft and, report an issue and they will hopefully resolve it. And one other thing that Josh reminded me of is that it's not really a con, although it may be a little bit of a pain or panic inducing, is that while you can put literally millions of tasks and line items within Microsoft Lists, because it is a web-based tool, it will only show you 5,000 items. It can only handle 5,000 items that you can see in the view. So if you're looking for something in particular and you can't see it and you've somehow surpassed 5,000 line items, you can always filter to find things that you need or sort from, the most recent line item just to make sure that you are looking for the right thing. But your data hasn't disappeared. It's just only so much that the app can handle for now in terms of viewing. So there's a few ways to access Microsoft Lists. One is to go into your O365 account, which we're going to show you today. But there's also a couple of other ways to add lists. One is within your own Teams channel. So if you have a Teams channel, maybe you're working on a project together within Teams. I have a screenshot here of the top bar of a Teams channel. And if you go to Files right here, that tab, you will see an option to create a Microsoft list within Teams. And then there's also SharePoint. This is more relevant to people who are actually SharePoint administrators. Not everyone has access to edit within SharePoint, but if you are one of those people, that little new button on the kind of towards the top left of your screen, you will see that list is an option that shows up in the dropdown. So that is another way that you can create a list, although that would be within your SharePoint site. And one other way that is not listed on this slide is that you also can download the mobile app for lists and always log in that way to see your lists. I'm going to move on to the demonstration. Josh, is there anything you'd like to add that I may have missed about lists?
No, that is perfect. I'll just say if you have any questions, I'm monitoring the chat. I don't see any yet, so feel free to throw them in as you're getting ready to present.
Yeah, guys, if you have any questions, yeah, feel free to post them in the chat while I am going through the demo, but I'm going to switch over to that right now. And Josh, can you verify that you can see my browser?
I sure can.
Okay, perfect. So this is my O365 account. I logged in at o365.weill.cornell.edu with my seaweed and password, and most of you are probably familiar with that. If you haven't been into O365 in a while, it has slightly changed as Microsoft kind of adds more Copilot features within the app. So the interface is slightly different. But if you are looking for lists, there's a couple of ways that you can find it. One is going into this top left menu here, And you can look for lists right here. There's that logo I was telling you about. If you haven't used lists recently, it may not show up here, but you can always click more apps or just type lists right here and click it. Or the other way is just to type lists right in this giant field in the middle of your screen and click it that way. So when I select it, I am taken to my lists dashboard. And just to give you kind of a lay of the land, right here, we have a giant button at the very top that says create a new list. So that's where you would go to start making your list. I have some favorites here that I've tagged and they've been pinned to the very top. These are lists that I use quite frequently. So I made sure that I have them pinned to the top. And if you ever want to pin a list, all you have to do is hover over any list that you have and just click that little star icon and it'll drag it up here. I've got two tabs here. One is recents. So these are all the lists that I've recently accessed. And then there is my lists. And the difference between these two is my lists are lists that I personally created. And recents are lists that I have access to, but I did not create them. Somebody else gave me access to these lists. Okay, so that's the difference. Let's start making a list from scratch. So let's go here to the very top, click new list, and we're going to get a little pop-up from Microsoft. It's going to take a few seconds. Perfect. So at the very top, we've got a few options to create a list. One is completely from scratch. That's blank list. But you can also create lists from existing Microsoft lists that you have access to, or if you've got data that's already in Excel or in a CSV format, you can actually upload that and then edit from there. So, if you've already been working from some type of data source like Excel, you don't have to necessarily start from the beginning and type it all out within a blank list. You can kind of work with what you have and then edit as needed. And then here are all those templates that I was talking about. So again, you've got templates for things like issue tracker, employee onboarding, event itinerary, and so on and so on. There's a ton of options here that you can take a look at. And it's nice because if you don't really know where to start with Microsoft Lists, you at least have some type of starting point, and then you can edit the list as needed for whatever it is that you need to track, whatever data points. So I want to show you at least how to do a list from scratch so I can kind of go through the features a little more, and then you know how to customize things to your liking. So we're going to start a blank list, and you have to name it. We're going to call this one Tech Tuesday Demo. You can add a description if you'd like. Choose a color that is, your favorite. I'm going to do red just because it stands out. And I kind of like the light bulb. And then you can choose where you want to save this to. So by default, it's going to recommend your list dashboard, which is what you just saw. But you'll also notice this is giving me the option to save my list to any Teams channel that I'm currently a part of or any SharePoint site that I'm also currently a part of. So there's a ton of places that I could actually save this. But for the purposes of today's demonstration, I'm just going to stay in my list and hit create. All right, so this is my blank canvas. Welcome to your new list. And then it says select the new button to get started. That button is right here on the top left. If I click that right now, I can add a new line item to my list, but I only have two options, the title of it and adding attachments. That's not really useful to me right now. I would really like to add more data fields that make this list more useful to me. Let's say that I am creating a list that it's tracking requests that I get for work. So if I wanted to update my list form to add those new data points, I have to add columns to do that. So what I'm going to do is add my first column here. And it's asking me what type of data do you want this to be part of this column? Do you want to assign to this column? I am going to choose from this list and I'm going to do text first. What I would like to do is add a description field to give kind of context to what the line item is. I'm not going to add a description to the description, but you can if you'd like to define what type of information you want in that column. And then I can click type to see what I want to add. I'm going to add multiple lines of text. And you can give something a default value or use a calculated value. This is more useful if you are adding like numbers to a particular field. In this case, it's just text. It's not going to be useful for me. And then you always have this option here to uh, show more options that you can use to make this column have data that is specific to what you need. So because this is a text column, it's asking me if I want to use rich text, if I want to require that information, is in this column to submit the form. And then if I want to add all content types, I'm just going to choose this as is and click save. And so there is my description column. And then I'm just going to continue to add things to make this list work the way I want to. Here's another one that's probably going to be very popular when you create your list, which is person. This is how you assign things to somebody. So I'm going to name this assigned to. We're going to keep it as a person. I guess we can show profile photos. Why not? Let me add a couple of more columns. I'm going to add a date and time. And this is going to be my deadline column. And you can include things like the time if you want. I'm just going to save it as is for the sake of the presentation. And I'm going to do something called choice. Choice allows you to add options that you can select from a drop-down list, and you get to choose what those options are. This I want to call status. And I've got choices here that I can add. Right now, they're not defined as anything, but I can always do things like in progress, completed, not started. And there are these little artist boards here that I can always click on to change the color and formatting of these. I can also add more choices if I wanted to. So let's say choice 4 could be something like running behind, something like that. All right. And that looks good to me. I'm not going to go into the more options here. I've got status, and let me do one more column, which is I'll add a hyperlink. All right. We'll call it document links. Perfect. So now I've got my column set up. If I am happy with this, if I go to add new item now that is changed completely to include all of the fields that I just created within my list. So let's say I got a request from a doctor for Qualtrics training. I do get quite a few of those. So let me put that in. And I can give some context to it. I'll say Dr. House would like to have Qualtrics training on March 3rd. Let's say that's what he wants. I'm going to assign it to myself. So if I just start typing in my name, you'll see that because it's integrated with O365, I can find myself and add myself to it. I can also look for, let's say, Josh. There he is. And if I add Josh, he will actually get a notification, usually through Outlook or whatever he's got set up, but he'll get a notification that I have assigned a task to him. I would also recommend, which I'll show you in just a minute, if you're going to assign other people tasks, you need to give them access to this list so that they can actually see what it is that you're giving to them. But just for the sake of simplicity, I'll add myself first before I add Josh. I'll give myself a deadline. There are my dates. Let's do the 3rd since that's when he wants to meet. I have not started this yet. I don't have a document link yet, but maybe I want to add the Qualtrics survey once I start working on it with Dr. House. And then I can add attachments here. I can do them directly from my desktop, or I can even go into my OneDrive if I need to add documents. I'm just putting any old thing in there, but I can add a ton of documents that have to do with this specific task. And when I hit save, it's going to take a few seconds, but there it is. There is my first line item there. I'm going to add one more really quickly. I'm not going to add too much. I'm going to assign this one to Josh and add another deadline of March 21st. I'll put in progress and we'll save just so we have a couple of things on here. Okay, perfect. So this is my list. It's starting to look good. I'm starting to get things going. All right. Once you start having more and more data as part of your list, you're going to need to go through it and find information easily. So here, right next to your list are some tabs. You've got a filter option, which is going to take a few seconds to load. Come on. While that is loading, I'm also going to hover over these options right here. You can also group these tasks by, status, who it's assigned to, just to make things easier. And you can also sort, if you want to sort from deadline, the date that's, most pertinent, that's coming up the soonest, things like that. I'm gonna redo filter to see. There we go. So I can also filter things to find anything that's in progress, for example, and it will filter it that way. I can do by date. This will change depending on what fields you actually have as part of your list. All right. There's also ways to add views. So for example, I've got 2 deadlines here within March. Once I start adding more and more tasks, I might want to get a handle of what the amount of work that we have for a given time frame. So if I add a view of calendar, let's say, let's do month. And there's options to, start date and end date on a calendar, what you want to add. I only have a deadline right here. But you can make this public if you want. And there are always more options that you can explore. I'm going to hit create. So there's my calendar view. We're in February right now, but if I go into March, those are those 2 tasks and the deadlines that I've set for them. And you'll notice that if I hover over any of these other dates, you'll see that a new hyperlink appears. And if I click on that, that just gives me the option to add a new line item to my list that will be saved in the other view as well. So it's a nice way to just kind of add data depending on the view that you prefer to look at. But this has been really helpful, for example, for ITS communications. We get a ton of requests, and a lot of times we want to make sure that we're not sending out like too many messages in one day. So we can always look at our calendar view and see like, okay, what are we sending out for the week? Do we need to shuffle anything around for it to make sense for all the work that we're getting? I'll add another list view, actually, status view, which I really like. And what I like to do in this case is, why does it look like that? One second. I want to look at this, all items. And if I wanted to group by status, I can get a nice accordion of what we're working on and close something that I, am not really interested in. If I'm not really interested in things I haven't started yet and just wanted to focus on what's in progress, I could do that just by playing around with these options here at the top of my columns and just group things. And I can always save this view as a status view, just so I always have this available to look at in this format. You'll notice that when I click on any of these columns, I do get some options to change some settings. And this is where you get things like conditional formatting and things like that. Let me go actually here to assigned. We'll do format this column. Here's some conditional formatting. Just as a note, if I go into advanced mode, that's where the JSON coding is if you want to kind of do a little more than what you currently have available in Microsoft List for, designated formatting. Feel free to take a look at this if you are familiar with JSON coding, or as Josh recommended, take a look at Copilot and see what it gives you with those prompts. Really quickly, let me go back in there. And we'll do some conditional formatting. Let's say that I want to add a rule to have some color coding that if the person who's assigned is me, we'll do some color coding. We'll make me purple. That's my favorite color. Let's save that. And there it is. And I can do the same for anyone on, that's on my list. I can do some conditional formatting there. You can do formatting for any column here. You just have to go to the drop down, do settings, and then column settings, and then format this column. You'll also notice you can do a ton of other things like edit the column, hide it, widen it, anything that you would like to do with your data. I'm going to direct your attention here to the very top. There are also other things you can do with your list. if you're used to working in something like Excel and you're kind of used to seeing things in cell, you can always edit in grid view, and that gives you kind of clearer cells to work in. And you can also share your list. There are a few ways to share. One is I could share the entire list with somebody. I could type their name in. I could click this eyeball right here, and then I can choose the permissions of what they can see or edit. So, if I just want somebody to be able to look at the list and send them the link, I can absolutely do that through here. And then, that person would be notified through Outlook that I'm trying to share this list with them. I can also share individual tasks with somebody. So if you hover over any task, you'll see these three dots. And there's a lot of options. I can go back in and edit them again. I can manage access to them, but I can also share or copy the link and do the same thing that way. You'll also notice that when I hover over any of these tasks, you'll see a little comment box. And this is really cool because let me click on that again. So here's the comment box. Let's say that I'm out of the office and Dr. House calls about the training for Qualtrics and he says, I actually don't want to do the training on March 3rd. Is Vanessa available on March 6th? And I'm not in the office. But if, my manager took that inquiry, she could always leave a comment here and say, hey, Vanessa, Dr. House wants to update the training date. And she could say, can you please call him or something? But when she submits that comment, basically what will happen is I will get a notification in my email saying that somebody has tried to, has updated this task so that I can, go back and follow up with it. And then we also have some more options here. Copy link is very similar to share in that you're just getting the link and could share it with somebody so they could look at your list. Um, you also have export here. So you can export any data that's in your list as it accumulates to Excel. So you've got export to CSV with schema. And I did mention export to Power BI. So shameless plug, we actually have a Power BI Tech Tuesday session next week. So if you're interested in how to create visualizations with data that you have, please, I'll send the information for that session. Feel free to sign up. But once you kind of get a handle on how to use Power BI, you can actually take data from your list if you've got a ton of data and export it to Power BI to do really cool visualizations as well. Forms is actually a new part of List that I found very helpful. But essentially, what that does is you can create kind of like an intake form that would connect directly to your list. Let me actually get out of this view really quick. All items. Here we go. Um, it is not giving me what I would like. Josh, if you think I'm doing something, uh, if I've done something incorrect, because that's not what I was expecting to see. I was expecting to see all the fields. Let's try that again.
Yeah, so you probably just need a refresh
Yeah.
because you added the fields. Refresh will be your friend when it comes to lists because it is a view in a browser, of course. So it does take a minute for it to recognize that. But yeah, by default, it will show all of your
There we go.
fields.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you, Josh.
And you
Yeah,
can just check and uncheck at will. Yep.
awesome. Thank you for that. So let's say this is a request form that I've created for myself. Let's say that people keep asking me for things. I kind of don't always want to type in all of the data. So I create this intake form, right? Where I can share a link to, that would populate directly into my form. So if I wanted to do an intake form like this, right now it's just kind of copying over what my list is like. It has all the fields for my list, but I don't think somebody needs to necessarily know who a request is assigned to, what the deadline is necessarily. Like that's something I would have to kind of define on my own after working with the person. But if you go to the right-hand side here, you can actually remove any of the fields that you don't think the person needs to see. You can add some. So I added attachments. And if I wanted to share this with somebody, I could copy the link, put it in a new field here, a new window. I'll call this test, blah, blah. and submit, it should just take a second. And let me refresh. Might take a little bit, but essentially, oh, there we go. Here's a test request that was submitted through the form. So that's a really great way if you're trying to get a handle on feedback, or doing like issue tracking, and you just create a quick form that integrates with your list. All of that information will compile into the list, and then you can add information about like who it's assigned to, what the deadline will be, what the status is, add anything else that needs to be a part of it. I'll quickly go into Automate since I know we've only got a few minutes left. But you can set reminders for yourself. So, if there's going to be a deadline on March 3rd, maybe I want to know like 3 days in advance that, I have this thing coming up and I need to know about it. So I could just click continue here and give myself a little bit of a reminder there. And so any deadline assigned to me will be, I'll get a notification 3 days in advance. And you can manage that as needed, and you can always change that. You can also do manage alerts for particular line items. So if you only want alerts for one particular thing that may be really important, you can do that as well. And you can also create rules and configure approvals even for, if leadership needs to sign off on something that's going on in a list, you can definitely make sure that they're a part of the list and can, work on things with you to make sure that everything is going through the proper channels and approved. I'm not going to go too much into integrate. It will take too much time to explain these things. But again, this can integrate with Power BI. You can upload all this data into Power BI and create visualizations. That's going to be next week. Josh is actually doing a Power Automate session in a few weeks. He'll be talking about how just Power Automate works in general, and how you can use that in various Microsoft apps. And then we've also got Power Apps. If you're familiar with any of these, I'm happy to include in the follow-up email some links about how to use these integrations with lists. And we can work from there if you have any other questions about it. And then these three dots here, you can also manage your alerts from here. And of course, if you want to manage access to the entire list, you would just click here. And right now it says I'm the only owner. But if I wanted to add another owner like Josh and manage his access, I can give him full control. He can have as much access as I do. I'll grant him access and he'll get a notification saying, hey, you're part of this list. And if he wanted to add line items, add columns, or whatever he wanted to do to make this list work in a way that works for us both, we can do that. If you ever got tired of a list and you didn't want to see it anymore, you're done with it, you can click on the name and delete it from there. Or if you just wanted to delete one particular line item, you can actually click on those three dots and delete it right there and get rid of it, and just continue making the list look how you need to. That's most of lists. Oh, one more quick thing. If you want to favorite it, there's the little star. And if you click on it, that adds it to your favorite list. So it is pinned at the very top. If you have any feedback you want to give to Microsoft about lists, you can actually click this little icon of a person talking, and that will open a feedback form where you can report an issue or make suggestions or say something you like about lists to Microsoft, and maybe they'll improve it even further. And these are, of course, just your settings. Here's a recycle bin for anything that you may delete in Microsoft Lists. If you need to get it back, you can absolutely do that. And those are some master settings for your list that you can always explore. I'm gonna take a look really quick at the comments, but it seems like Josh has been going through this chat like very good. Yeah, awesome. Um, are there any other questions that have not been answered? Or Josh, are there any points that you want to make that you've seen come up in the chat?
Actually, just a couple. I'll do my Josh quick hits at the end.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to hear my voice, don't worry, it won't be that long. One thing is keep in mind that this is multi-editing, so you can see my name now that Vanessa shared it with me, highlighted there. This will be live, so if you share this with people, much like Excel, you can see I'm clicking on different fields and it's changing her view there to show where people are. So you don't lose the multi-editing capability that you have in Excel when you're moving to something like lists. That's just one thing I wanted to call out. Another thing that I wanted to mention really quick at the end, because I see it a ton use case wise, if you refresh your browser, I created another view called cards. And it might take a second because you're streaming here as well. So there it is. If you click on that, I just wanted to call it out because there was a couple questions on the differences between like to do and planner and now lists. Lists is basically for data that doesn't fit into to do or planner, right? My recommendation here is typically use planner or to do if you can. If you can't, because you need more fields or you need more customization or you need something that you don't have the customization capabilities in planner or to do, you can replicate a very similar view like this that is Planner, but you lose a lot of the integrations of Planner um, uh, at face value out of the box, right? So keep in mind that this view exists too. This is one that I get asked a lot, and you can drag and drop this in between the different buckets, if you will, the same way you do in Planner. So if you wanted to take like an in progress one and move it to completed, it does actually change the record if you just drag and drop a card in here as well.
Nice. Cool. I did see a question in the chat. Catherine, if your colleague wasn't able to attend, I can send it to her, but please feel free to forward the follow-up email to anybody on your team who wasn't able to attend and is interested in using lists, or you're trying to convince them maybe to use lists. I mean, this is not information that is like confidential. If you want to use it and you want to share it, please feel free. There's not going to be any like access requirements to get this information or this recording. Um, Josh, there is a question from Patricia about whether you can do separate tabs within a list like Excel. I don't think you can, but correct me if I'm wrong. Would you just have to create a new list?
Sort of. So I was actually typing, but we can just talk about it live here. So the answer to that is no, not in the exact same way that you do with Excel. However, that's kind of the functionality of views, right? So the views at the top can act as your tabs at the top. So those views in this example has been like just different ways to see all of the data, but you can actually make those views different ways to see a subset of your data as well, right? So you could have a view that says just my tasks and it just shows you your tasks or just tasks within the past week, right? So that can simulate the thing at the top or the thing at the bottom with Excel. It's on the top, and you also have to keep in mind that the field that you're filtering on needs to exist in the data. But then once it's there, you can use those fields at the top to slice and dice your data.
I work on multiple projects simultaneously and prefer to have one list with all my tasks across all projects. Can I add a custom label to each task that will categorize the task by project? Oh, you got that one, Josh. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the answer is basically you can absolutely do that. Or like you mentioned earlier, use a lookup field. So a lookup field is basically just go to another list and pull information from it.
Yeah.
Or you can just modify a one big list with subcategories, have like a category column or a project column to kind of slice and dice it that way.
Yeah, and just to demonstrate where that is, if you add a column here, here's that lookup option if you want to look up in between lists, or you could add a choice, like I did with the status column, to identify a project name or something if you want to categorize it that way. I guess it depends on what you prefer. One more question. I asked that question. I wanted to follow up since you mentioned Planner. I'd like to do the same thing in Planner, have one plan for all projects and label tasks with the project name. Is that possible like it is in lists? Josh, you can
Yeah,
you?
I can take that one. The answer is no. You so well. I guess the answer is not directly. So Planner, if you are assigning appropriately, you can see all of your tasks in Planner. So items that have been directly assigned to you within one view. However, you can't necessarily have one plan that spans multiple plans like you can in lists. So if that is a requirement, unless you have one big planner with those like labels as the subcategories. So I guess if you rethink how your your plans are formatted, you can't have one big plan with subcategories for each one, very similar to this. But if that's not an appropriate solution, it would be a reason to move to lists instead.
Awesome. Thank you, Josh. Well, we're just about at time. Is it possible to create a list from Outlook just to drag and drop the email like in the to-do list? Um, I haven't seen,
That you Yeah,
yeah,
that you can't do.
yeah. I was going
Um,
to say I haven't seen an option to create a list in Outlook. But I mean, you can share your list or share tasks with other people, and that triggers them to get an Outlook email. Um, yeah. Anything else you want to add, Josh, to that one? I don't.
Yeah, I think what they're referring to is the ability to like flag an email and it adds to your
Yeah.
to-do list. There is some options you could theoretically do in Power Automate with that. It would be somewhat dangerous because you'd be stomping on that functionality. So rather, you could have something like when I move an email to a specific folder, then create a task in lists. So something like that's possible, but I wouldn't necessarily stomp on the functionality of flagging it and adding it to your to-do list. I would leave that in to do.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we're at time. If you do have other questions that you didn't get a chance to ask during today's session, please reply to the follow-up email. Happy to take your questions. If I can answer them, I will. If not, Josh is also here, and he is a great source of information for anything Microsoft. But I really appreciate you all taking the time to learn more about lists. Hopefully it piqued your interest a bit and you try it out. It can be a very helpful tool and very powerful when you add something like Power Automate or Power BI to integrate with it. So I'll be sure to send you all that follow-up email with a link to the recording and some links from Microsoft about how to use lists. I'll also try to throw in a few training tutorials from LinkedIn and anything else that might be helpful as you get started with lists. So thank you guys so much for joining. I'll be sure to also include next week's registration link for Power BI if you are interested. So have a great rest of the afternoon, and thank you so much, Josh, for helping out with today's session.
Happy to help anytime.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.